Hello and welcome to LangTime Chat, episode 43 with Jesse and David.
Hi.
Jesse's first.
Hi.
That's me.
Oh, hey.
Hey.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you doing, David?
My name is David.
All right, so David's moving around a lot over here.
I'm ready.
I decided that for this podcast, inspired by some recent discussions that actually Bibloridian started in our chat during our last live stream, I decided to talk today about common expressions in languages. Specifically talking about we sometimes make a sheet, like a one-page sheet of common expressions to share for our conlang, specifically for like projects we're working on or whatever, where we think, oh, here's some extra dialogue you may use. And so we want to hit some of those really common expressions. And this one page sheet has a chart on it that's something like, English, hello or hi or goodbye, good morning, good day, and so on. So it's like got the English and then it's got, how to say these things in the language with phonetic transcriptions and other information. It's again like a one-page chart. It's a nice summary. It's so simple. It looks so easy when you just have this one page. It's like that one page you open in a travel book for like, when you get there, here's how to greet people. And yet, I'm going to just go ahead and say that that one page is harder than 10 pages of translated dialogue.
I'd say that I'd say that with these greetings, and should we say what they are real quickly?
Oh, well, we're going to...
People can't see them.
I just had this up. We can, now that you've drawn attention to it, but they each get their own slide. So it's not like they're not going to hear them. But hello, goodbye, good morning, good day, good night, please, thank you, you're welcome, excuse me, and sorry.
So I believe that for conlangs specifically, there is a bell curve. Very beginning conlangers will have all of these. As you get more experience, you're probably going to get fewer and fewer of these. And then as you get even more experience and conlangs get more fleshed out, then you'll find conlangs have all of these again. It's that middle ground where I think a lot of conlangers are, where it's like you realize how kind of complicated and nuanced these things are.
Yeah.
And so for that reason, it's much easier to just go with, here's my word for rock,
right?
Rather than get to this stuff. Whereas like, beginning conlangers, it's like, okay, what's my word for hello going to be? Britski. What's my word for goodbye going to be? Blokskama. And then you just plunk them on down without even thinking about them. And then, of course, by the time you've really, really sat with it, then it's like, all right, I have all of these, and each of them has like a page backstory for how we got there,
I need to make plunk them down, like grammaticalize it, make it a thing. It's going to be a thing in a language. Plunkado. In honor of David. And it's going to be like Plunkado. I don't know what it's going to mean yet, but it's going to happen.
That'd be, if that were a Finnish word, it would be what, Plungada.
Ooh. Plungada. Well, I really feel like, doesn't it feel like you're saying like, oh, here you go. Plungada. Okay. So David, I think, has a really apt description of that. That was really nice in terms of like where you find these phrases and the level of, I don't want to say thoughtfulness, but connectedness that you're going to find with them with conlangs. Some of these, I think, too, like conlangers make more difficult than they need to be because we're like always ready to make things more difficult on ourselves. Others of them, I think sometimes we forget just how complex they are. Okay. So we're going to go one by one and just have discussions. I'm not even going to put examples up on the screen. It's just going to be, here's a word, let's discuss it. And it's all going to be open and like ideas and just flowy. Easy breezy. Hello. Hello. So yeah, our first word here is hello, which of course you have to contend with the fact that you have, hello, hi, hey. You've got like all these different variations on it. And in some languages, hello and welcome are synonymous, really.
Mhm.
In other languages like English, not really. Like, welcome usually means something a little bit different than hello. Um, and hello, as far as I know, in English was actually not really used as a greeting until the telephone. Am I correct in remembering that?
Yeah, that's where it was popularized. Of course, the creator of the telephone, Alexander Graham Bell, um, favored the greeting ahoy,
Mm-hmm.
and tried but failed to popularize it. This is actually one of the amusing throwbacks on The Simpsons, where Mr. Burns is supposed to be so old that he, has a lot of these very, very ancient expressions and things like that. He says that his social security number is not two, and then it's like damn, whoever else got the first one, but that's why he answers the phone ahoy ahoy, like that was what Alexander Graham Bell thought people should do when they were picking up a telephone.
Well, speaking though of ahoy
Mhm.
and something like hey, sometimes you can have a greeting like this that actually means nothing, but is the sound that a person may make when they suddenly see someone, like oh, or hey.
Yeah,
Like it may not resolve to something, especially
that's
the
true.
informal, hey variations. It could just be the sound that you
Yeah.
make.
So I've got two things here. One, since we brought up the telephone, I did
Uh-huh.
want to bring this up. It's one thing, creating a greeting, but then with telephones, if your society is in that place for your conlang, it's not necessarily the case that people will answer a telephone with a greeting. And so, for example, like my mother happens to be in Spain right now, and the last time that she was in Spain was, gosh, I guess it was 30 years ago. We had gotten tickets from the father of an exchange student who was staying with us from Spain, Sonia Hermosillo, and she's going to visit with her while they're over there. Anyway, Sonia, when she was over here, I mean, she had learned English, but when she would answer the telephone, she would say yes,
Oh, yeah.
and it's like, theoretically, there's nothing wrong with that.
It's just
Answer the telephone in Spanish, see.
when you're used to hello, that sounds like whoa.
Yeah.
But yeah, if that's what you do, that's what you do.
Often I say bueno, shortening for buenos dias, buenas noches, or whatever, um, which I think is also common. But anyway, yeah, there's no reason that you necessarily would use a greeting, because part of what your concultural work can be is not just how do we get these words, but which words you use in which circumstances. Right. And I think that's that's something to keep in mind for the rest of this.
Right, right. And I think too, for some of these, because I was trying to think of ideas, and not even inspired by languages I've seen or anything, just think of like ideas of like what expressions could be grammaticalized and shortened for something like hello. And some of them that I thought of was like, you could very simply say, I see you. That could mean hello, shortened and, condensed over time, right? Even something like, you are here, or you're near me, or you're in my place. Like there are a lot of different types of things that could just come from sort of Captain Obvious statements that end up just being what people say when they see somebody, to be like, I acknowledge that you are here.
Mm-hmm. I remembered one of the other ones. There is apparently a very small area of Sweden that has an extraordinarily rare sound that just means hello, and it's
Whoa.
and like I don't know what the IPA is. If you Google around, you'll find this, and there's videos. It's great, but essentially, it's like you kind of like pucker your lips and suck in, and that's it.
That is so interesting.
It's like doing a voiceless, ingressive
And that's in Sweden?
Yeah.
where they have cold air, where you may be sucking cold air right past those sensitive front teeth.
Yeah,
Ooh,
and as I recall, like somewhere in northern Sweden too. It's like not
ouch.
like all over the country. It's a very small place in there.
That is fascinating.
Yeah.
Wow.
Very bizarre.
Okay, so I don't want to spend too long on each
Sure.
one of these because I feel like we could we could have a whole hour on just like how do you say hello.
How about favorite a favorite? And it could be from a conlang or a netling.
For me?
Yeah, and we'll both do one.
Oh, I did not prepare myself for this, so you start.
Well, we might, and that it's kind of off the cuff, so we might not both have one. I will tell you my favorite that I've done. It's from Erathian, and the way you say hello is eseneziri, and esenu. Shoot, how does that work? Because it's e u o. Right. So it would be esenu. Esenu is esenu, right? Is a weapon, and specifically a like a kind of like a hidden weapon or whatever. Esene would be the plural. Ziri is just like kind of like an abessive suffix. It doesn't make sense to analyze it as a case. It's more like a clitic, but it's just a suffix you can add to anything it means without. And so eseneziri means without hidden weapons.
Oh, nice.
And it went along with kind of like a gesture where whatever you do, you basically show your open palms to somebody to say that, you know, to greet them, you're saying like, I'm showing you everything I've got and I haven't got anything hidden to try to attack you or anything.
I can't think of one. So I'm just going to say that at some point I need to grammaticalize the sun shines on you.
Oh, I like that.
As a hello greeting. That'll be joie. I'll make it the sun shines on you and grammaticalize it and make it a whole thing.
Yeah. Oh, also, last thing on hello before we leave. There was some small town in one of those square states, probably Kansas, where...
It's a rectangle, not a square, but whatever.
Where at some point, you know, this very small town got together and said, you know, goodness, this word hello, it's you know, it's sacrilegious.
It's a little hellish.
That's right. And so they changed it to heaven-o.
Heaven-o! Oh my goodness.
And it got enough attention that it was like one of those last segments on local news, you know, that I managed to see here in California where it says, and for something different, you know, before they close it. And yeah, this interview with a guy, him answering a phone saying, heaven-o!
That's just amazing. Yeah. Okay, I love it.
That was the 90s. We'll see if it's still in use anywhere.
That's hilarious. Okay, so another, I had mentioned, right, that welcome could be synonymous for hello in a language. And from English, sometimes we forget that welcome is literally, you know, the adverb well and the verb come. To in other words, be like arrive well, right? Like that's hello. Now, on the other side of that, you say welcome, but you say farewell for goodbye. You know, like fare, go thee well, right? Like travel well, be well. And that's one way of saying goodbye. It's a very formal way, so not many of us use it anymore. English's goodbye is actually a shortening of God be with you. Mm-hmm. And a lot of goodbyes in especially Proto-Indo-European languages, or Indo-European rather, I should say, because it's not from the Proto. Later stages brought in a religious aspect for a lot of ways to say goodbye, including Spanish adios, which is, you know, adios, to God, mm-hmm. Like go to God kind of thing. Which is then interesting because, you know, in German, a curse is go to the devil. So that's a curse. But anyway, so thinking about ways to part and say goodbye is the other half of the, like, what do you say when someone comes up to you? What do you say when they're leaving? And I know in Chicopsa, we did one that was like, walk well or something, walk firmly or walk. We did something based on the verb to walk, and it was something about like being able to go about your way safely, essentially.
I'll look it up. When you're coming up with these things, I'll try to help, fact check for you.
David's got the laptop going here. But no, it was just like I know that was one that we had thought of. Goodbye again is another thing that often gets shortened. Where did where did ciao come from?
Italian?
Right, but like where in Italian? Like why does Italian say ciao?
Looked it up. By the way, it's 1997 and it was Texas. Some dude tried to get it to lobby to get it to be the official greeting of Kleberg County.
I gotta say, I'm not surprised. But
I remember ciao has some sort of like strange etymology. Hold on a sec. Gotta go down to.
Well, that's what because I was, like with hello, I was thinking you can kind of just do sounds that get made.
That's right. It comes from Phoenician, where it's a shortening of shavo, which is the word for slave.
Oh.
And it comes from the expression of basically shavo vostro, and then there's clipping because of the double vo, and so it's shavostro, and it drops the I am part, but it's literally I am your slave. So in other words, when you say goodbye, it's like I am your slave,
or I am at your service is another way of thinking of that.
Yeah, and then servus, that's how you say hello in Latin, right? Or it's one of the ways.
I thought so. Yeah.
Yeah.
So okay.
So it doesn't say whether it started as a greeting or a leave taking, though. Maybe it was both.
Well, and that's another thing. Like, for instance, in Hawaiian, aloha is hello and goodbye. You don't have to have two separate words for them. It could simply be like you're welcoming somebody, you're sending them off, and you have the same sort of idea or gesture or meaning behind what you're saying, whether they're arriving or leaving. Another interesting thing that made me think of was perhaps having a goodbye that differs. Like if you're the one staying in one place and other people are leaving, what you say versus if you're the one leaving, you may say something different.
That's true.
And so like there could actually be differences, which is then interesting, right? Like if you're the one leaving and the other person is staying stationary, if you think literally about farewell, it doesn't make as much sense. It makes much more sense to be wishing somebody farewell as they run along on their journeys. And what did it resolve to? Like I saw how to say goodbye in Chicopsa, but I couldn't remember what it resolved to.
Allative. It's turn to the wind.
Turn to the wind. That's what it was. It was not step. Never mind.
Yes.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah.
Oh, I like that. That's now my favorite. Turn to the wind. We had a lot of fun with these common expressions in Chicopsa, by the way, in case anyone out there is wondering. And it was one of our first expression sheets that we had ever made for a language.
Yeah.
And that was also exciting.
Yeah. By the way, I wanted to mention that just in case for people doing conlang work or thinking about it. There's stuff that that you're required to do, and then there's other stuff. It was Jesse's idea to make just a little one-page sheet for common expressions. Hello, goodbye, thank you, things like that in Chicopsa, because they would ask for things like that, but also we were there on the set and we just thought people were interested. It turned out to be very popular and quite useful. And honestly, that's something that I hadn't done since Defiance. But honestly, I thought it was great and something I think that, we should consider whenever we do things like that. It's just a little nicety. It doesn't take that much time, providing you've created this stuff. And it's just a nice thing to help that, people are interested in, because it's the same thing with any language when, often what they'll look at is like, oh, how do you say like hello, goodbye? It's something that you can say. Right. They don't open it up to be like, well, how do you conjugate verbs? Nah.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Do you have anything to add to goodbye in terms of other,
no.
a favorite etymology, a favorite way to do it?
Mm-mm. No, I can't think of anything really good. What I did for High Valyrian was Gerosilas, and what I remember is that I forgot what the etymology was for a long time, and then had to literally go back in and figure out what on earth
Oh my gosh.
I meant. And I was like, oh, okay, so it was in this case, and it was okay. Now it like made sense, and it was basically you're telling it says roads lie straight. So it was like that was the thing that was really throwing me off. I was like, why is this thing ending in an S? And it's because it's in the vocative plural.
Whoa.
And so you're addressing the roads, and it's like you're saying it to about the person you're saying goodbye to, but you're addressing the roads. So it could work for you, could work for them, and it's like may the roads lie straight.
That's amazing. I love it. Random side note: did the British Cheerio? Is that literally like cheer? Like have cheer? If so, I also love that, and
it would be very British if it just came from.
And there we go. I could have some sort of be merry or something like that for my goodbye and Joadi.
Yep.
It's literally from Cheer. I love it. Oh my gosh.
It reminds me of one of my favorite bits from Avatar: The Last Airbender, where Aang, who had previously been in the Fire Nation 100 years prior, is like, oh, I know how people talk. And then he goes by saying to people, Flameo, Hotman. And they're just looking at him like, kind of like Mr. Burns saying ahoy.
That's amazing.
Oh, yeah.
That's amazing. Okay. Now, the next slide I present kind of 4-in-1 here, because when you think about expressions like good morning, good day, good evening, good night, one, you have to think about how time is split up. And if you have a con world where you don't have mornings, days, nights, then obviously you're not going to have these. You may have good other things, but like it's not going to be this. Another thing is like you don't have to have a specific way of doing this. And in fact, in a lot of languages where you can say something like good morning, it literally breaks down to good morning, short for something like have a good morning, or it is a good morning, or something like that. So like it doesn't have to be fanciful. It could just be literal kind of shortening of that. Also, you don't have to have any sort of shortened expression for these. You could, if you want to express something like this in your language, it may be that you need to say a whole clause like, I see it as a good morning, or something of that nature. Also, how many different ways you split it up. Like in some languages, it may be odd to say like good day versus like saying, good morning, good evening, or good night. In English, we kind of get strong feelings about when to use these. Like, for instance, when I say good night to somebody, I'm usually saying good night like before bed, not like, just randomly like walking up to somebody in the evening hours when it's nighttime, like, hey, good night.
Like arriving at a party starting at 8. Oh, good night, everybody.
And yet good morning is a greeting, right? Like I don't say good morning like as you're leaving or something. Like I would say good morning as a greeting.
But let's talk about that in a minute. Go ahead.
And then one of my favorite bits, good day from Spirited, that movie with Will Ferrell and Ryan Reynolds.
Yes.
They had this bit where like back in the day, good day was an insult, like good day, my sir, or was it good afternoon?
I don't remember.
Oh shoot! Now I've forgotten the bit. It was either good afternoon or good day, but like it was used as a major insult, and so like they would like throw it around, and now that just makes me laugh. But these things can take on sort of extra meanings in a language, and specifically good day to me is not something I would ever just like. I think it was good afternoon in the movie, because in real life, if somebody says good day, like I feel like it would kind of have a bit of spite behind it. It's not really used in English very much, and yet in a language closely related to English, German, you say guten Tag all the time, like guten Tag.
Yeah,
like
it's
hello. It's another way of saying hello, really.
It's the same type of thing that you see with grammaticalization, essentially. So with the process of grammaticalization, it starts with this is just a set of words whose meaning is derived wholly from its parts, more or less, right? And then there's a time where it becomes a little weird to swap things out, right? And then there's a time where it's completely lost all of its lexical meaning. So good day in English, not the case. So it's just like, you know, arriving at a party at night. It'd be weird to say good day.
Right.
It'd be like, you know, it's not like it's like super wrong, or it'd be like, I don't understand what you're saying. It's weird.
It would even be weird though to me if you arrive at a party and you say good night.
Yeah.
Like that's what you say when you leave.
Yeah.
You can say good evening when you arrive. But like you can't say good night in the way that I use these phrases. Let me make that clear, because there may be dialects of English where it's like, no, I do that all the time. But like for me, it's like good morning is a greeting, good evening can be a greeting, but good night cannot be.
Yeah, but along the path of grammaticalization, then you can keep going to where, for example, bonjour in French literally means good day, but can be used anytime.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you would agree that that's the same in German, Guten Tag?
Interesting. I don't know how Germans feel about like a nighttime Guten Tag.
Yeah.
But I feel like you could. Like I, as a non-native speaker, would use it all the time, regardless of whether the sun's up, down, or wherever it is. But I don't know if native speakers kind of just laughed along with my English-speaking quirks.
Yeah.
But like it also just was shortened to tak.
Yeah.
Like, tak.
In Paris, but like, you know, entering a store or a restaurant at night, perfectly normal for the hostess or whoever to say bonjour.
Oh, know? Sure. Because like you even think like when you think about, well, how do you say hello in French? Bonjour.
Yep. And so it's, but absolutely couldn't do that with good day in English. And then Guten Tag, you know, it'd be interesting to hear.
Yeah.
So one thing that I'll mention from English is I am absolutely just tickled to death by British English, where in American English, I think, you know, good day, it's, I think, a bit more formal and stilted, right? But it can be a greeting or a leave taking. Good evening, same thing. Good morning in American English, mostly a greeting. Good night, mostly a leave taking.
Yeah.
Good morning in British English can absolutely be a leave taking. Because pretty much any of those, it would be like, you know, good morning. And then that's the end of the conversation. And one of the things I absolutely love, and you see this a lot in British period pieces where they're, you know, done up and everybody's dressing fancy, is it's not just enough to say it. You have to say that you're going to say it in the future. And then that's how you say it. And so you say, and I'll say good night to you now. And or I'll say good night. And that's like, you know, that's how you say good night.
I feel like the Midwesterner in me would be so confused, and I'd like linger in conversations not understanding that I've been dismissed.
Yeah, like it's done at that point.
Because like there's a joke, and it's not wrong, that Midwesterners have some of the longest goodbyes, and it's not wrong. And it starts, again, joke, that's not wrong, with a thigh slap and a whelp. Welp. And then you got to mention something about like, well, gotta get going.
Yeah.
And then it's, you know, it takes a while. It's a process. And so it's still, even with American English ways of ending conversations quickly, still throws me off. I have a hard time extricating myself from conversations where I'm not clear, like, did they pick up? Do they understand I'm leaving? Having somebody do something like that to me, where if they said good morning, or I'll say good morning to you, or something like that, I would be so confused and probably just standing there, and they would think I'm a little daft, probably. I would be like, where's my whelp? Where's my 30 minutes of lead-in? Where's my thigh slap? I don't know. So, okay. So those are things to think about with all the good bits of the day and night.
Yeah.
Oh, David, sorry, did you have something?
Yeah, I will just say one more. This is another place where you might consider that saying goodbye on the telephone is not necessarily going to be the same as what you do in person. And you won't necessarily say the same thing or anything at all.
Mm.
Yeah.
And it may be, TTFN.
Hmm.
Ta-ta for now.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
David's making a face at me.
Hmm. 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 Anyway.
David has never realized how much he could love until this moment. All right. So those were on the sort of greetings and leave taking side. What's coming up next is just kind of short. Well, it's kind of two halves of the same thing, right? So like one word, so important, please.
Mm-hmm.
When it gets used is very culturally dependent. How it gets used is culturally dependent. And where it comes from linguistically, in terms of where it comes from, um, you got a lot of options, including a root that just means please. It could go all the way back, like, if you please. It can just be like a really old root. However, it could also be something like a shortening of a phrase, like if you would consider it, or if you think, or do you mind, or could you? Any of those could be sort of shortened and used often enough that they could become a way of just saying please. Um, Really randomly, this has nothing to do with the slideshow itself, but this is in Noto Serif font on the screen.
Mm-hmm.
The L is taller than the capital P.
Yeah,
I don't know how I feel about that.
That's often the case. And look at the next slide.
I know the next slide. I mean, if you actually look at the slides, the next slide like is blowing my mind, and I didn't notice it when I was creating it, but seeing it all big on the screen, I'm like, oh my gosh, these letters, the ascenders, are bigger than the capital letters.
Yeah.
But anyway,
it looks like they did that on purpose. Honestly, it looks fine with please. It looks terrible with thank you. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, it looks terrible. Anyway, all that is to say, please can be a simple thing in your language, but it could also be something that comes from a much longer expression.
Yeah, and most often it's going to come from an expression that means like if you can, if you would, if it would please you. That's where s'il vous plaît comes from, and that is like if it please is literally what it is. In Hypalirian, it's postulus, which is if it can, which is a shortening for if it can be so. Mm-hmm. And that's in the subjunctive. Like usually you'll see some sort of weird type of expression that just gets shortened down for this, or the most common other source is our next slide.
And so let's segue then into our next slide, which is thank you, with, again, as David had mentioned, this terrible TH situation at the beginning where the H is taller than the capital T, and it creates a sort of checkerboard, like they almost touch at the edges, but they're
almost kitty cornered, but they're not. There's a slight overlap. It's so weird.
It is really bizarre. So if you see the slides, just shake your head at this TH situation. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, please and thank you could definitely be related. Mm-hmm. Think is another one that it could be an old root where the expression for thank you literally comes down to I thank you, or I give thanks to you. And it could be a very old word that is a root. It could, however, be an entirely different expression that gets used. And so we had mentioned this during the live stream, but perhaps my favorite is from Minishe, our language for Motherland Fort Salem. You actually say, I sing for you, because the way that the witches in the show use magic is through singing. And so if you sing for someone, then that's like you're showing your gratitude. And so that was our way of saying thank you. It was shortened down from I sing for you.
Yeah, and that's easily the best thing I've ever been attached to, having to do with thank you. The English expression, also the Germanic one, comes from same word that gives us thought. And it was essentially, it was like saying an appreciative thought. I think it becoming a verb was like a later occurrence after there had been some sort of phonological split. I think it just started off as a noun, be like it's a thought presumably for you, and probably needed to co-occur with a prepositional phrase, I'm guessing, at a very old stage.
I would think so, like you know, thoughts to you or for you. And it does make sense that it's a noun source, because that's probably also why we say thanks.
Yeah.
And, as the shortened, where that S is like, what else is it doing but making it sort of plural?
Right. And so my guess is at some point there was probably a phonological split, and it probably, they're both really high frequency terms, right? That's why we have think, thought, but if it's getting used so much in context of thinking, it probably diverged even further, and at some point the connection was lost. And so somebody just verbified its use, since you can do that with pretty much any noun in English or Germanic languages, and suddenly there you go. Now it's a verb, and a totally different looking word.
And also English, even the formal, right? Like, thank you. Of course, we have other things we could say, like I appreciate you, or many other ways we can give our thanks to people. But another thing to consider is that, you stands for all the second person pronouns in English. But if you want to have a full phrase in your conlang coming to mean thank you, and it has the word you in it, in your language, of course, make sure you're sensitive to the fact that, do you have a different singular you, plural you? Do you have a different form for, formal, informal? What are the different forms of you that you have? Because you're going to have to specify that, where it's like, when do you use this version of thank you versus another? And that is one that we had to think about in Menishe, because it was a full phrase, I sing for you. And we did create variations on it, where it's a single person thanking a group versus a single person thanking a single person versus the group thanking somebody. And so we had like kind of these multiple layers of ways to do it. And so that's something to think about.
A way to sidestep that is going the kind of romance route. Actually, how do you say thank you in Italian? Why?
Just a second. It's going to come to me. And I don't know why my brain just went blank when you asked me, because this is something I know.
Mine's gone blank, but it's like...
I've absolutely
gone blank. I've never studied it.
Well...
Hold on a sec. I'm getting it. It is... Grazie.
There we go.
Yeah, okay.
Grazie, of course.
So it is the same. So romance, because it's, gracias in Spanish and merci in French. All of these don't have pronouns attached to it. And the source of them, they're two different ones. One is, grace, or the word that has an equivalent of grace in English. And the other one is mercy. And basically, you are just wishing some sort of a nice thing.
Yeah.
Or saying that this nice thing comes from you. And without any pronominal attachment. We actually did have this in English for a while, probably due to the Norman conquest, and it survived in a very Englishy form, gramercy, which comes, of course, from grand merci. It's just merci with grand in front of it. And that's where gramercy comes from. That used to be used for a while before it fell out of favor.
Nice. Yeah.
Oh, and I say at some point I need to talk about Dothraki here, obviously. You let me know when that's...
Now.
Now?
Do it now.
Okay. So this is the slightly longer version of this. And I've told parts of this before. I've told the whole thing before. So if you've heard it before, just fast forward until you hear Jesse's voice again. All right. So when I applied for the Dothraki job, I I had a goal, which was to bowl them over with so much material that they would feel bad for not picking me, which I did. I prepared like 301 pages of material for the producers to consider. Make it linguistically dense so that it would just kind of overwhelm them. And then to do one page that was very short, very simply worded, that just had a bunch of factoids in them that I thought, people who weren't as familiar with language would find interesting, that were nevertheless true. So that was when I did things like say, there are 14 words for horse in Dothraki. It doesn't mean anything about the language. Shared some etymologies, shared some things that were kind of culturally related. Like one thing that I thought was pretty cool, actually, the word for pride in Dothraki is derived from the word for braid. I stand by that one. I think it's really cool. One of the things I shared was that there was no word for please in Dothraki. I had created a word for thank you. It was very simple. It was Sanat Jomari, means basically much respect. But I said that there was no word for please, which I thought made sense, and I stood by it. Anyway, they read this, and they had to do a big rewrite of the script anyway, because I got a bunch of notes from HBO and said that it had to change. You might have heard of this online. There was an original pilot script, which I do have. We all got it. That was very much almost identical to the relevant scenes in the book. In this new rewrite, after I had been chosen, and my Dothraki had been chosen, they wrote in a line where Daenerys was asking, what's the Dothraki word for thank you? And Jorah says, the Dothraki don't have a word for thank you. So they did have a word for thank you. It was in there. I had to remove it. I changed it just be something that you just say, hey, like much respect to you. But it didn't mean thank you specifically. I never felt very good about that. I thought it was unusual, to say the least. But it turns out that it's not. There was a paper that did a cross-linguistic survey of expressions of thanks that came out in 2018. And what they showed is that there are, plenty of languages like English and Romance languages and so on, where there is some sort of expression that is associated with thanks. There are also languages where there's no word, but there is gesture. There are languages where there's no fixed expression, but just several things that are kind of in rotation, things that you could say. And then there are also languages, plenty of languages, where there's just no equivalent that they can't find anything related to thanking at all. Not a word, not a gesture, not a custom. It's just not a part of the culture. But it's not as if these cultures are like, warlike, cartoonish barbarians or anything. They're just people. So it's something that can happen. You can create a conlang where there's just no term for thank you at all. Or essentially where gratitude is expressed in some other way and there's no special word attached to it.
Well, and also it could be that gratitude is expressed in so many different ways that are specific to each situation that, like culturally, linguistically, there's no way to sum it up and be like, here's how you say it. Like you have to be specific if you want to thank somebody. And you have to, mention, I like that you did this for me. Like you need to be really specific. As a real side note, super side note.
Can't wait.
Because David had mentioned there's 14 words for horses. And again, people not in linguistics tend to be like, oh my gosh, that says something big about the culture. So as David continued telling the story, because I have indeed heard that story before, I took a little side jaunt. And as a person who really doesn't know much about horses, I have written down 11 words in English for horses. In English.
Oh, I bet I can come up with more than that.
And that's, again, not a specialist. And this was while David was talking and I was still trying to pretend like I was interacting. So, this is just off the top of my head, horse is, of course, one of them.
Yep.
Mare.
Yep.
Foal. Colt. Filly. Stallion.
Yep.
Mustang. Stud.
Yeah.
And then some more specific Clydesdale.
Right.
Roan. Palomino.
Ooh, yeah.
And then I know there's another one I know that I can't think of off the top of my head. But if I saw it, I'd be like, oh, yeah, that's a word for a horse.
Yeah, I mean, there's one. I mean, it's a little
Pony. Pony is another
pony.
word.
There's also another one. I mean, it's a little less common, and really, if you don't have any special connection to the state of Colorado or the sport of football, you probably haven't heard this term. And I
Yeah.
know that.
Shoot, don't make fun of me. Bronco.
That's right.
Yes. But notice how all those words that I was listing, not a single one of them would have had the same etymology, and that's what I was going for, right? Like, it's not
Yeah.
like horse and horsey, where it's like,
Right.
oh, they're obviously related. It's like, these are legit, totally different words. And we have them in English, and that says nothing about English and our status
I know.
as a culture. Yet, when you summarize something like that for somebody else about Dothraki, and they're like, "Oh my gosh, these people,
Yeah.
they like their culture is so dependent on horses that they have different words that we would never have," and it's like, are you kidding me?
Yeah, actually, if you line them up, if you line up English horse terms versus Dothraki horse terms, there's more English ones. And so if that's all that was presented, I mean, who are the more horse-ish people? I mean, obviously it's us.
Obviously.
We go around, saying things like pony up.
David, it goes back to
every pony.
The Norman conquest when the Normans actually came over with horses on the ships.
That's right.
And fought battles on horseback, which they had never seen in England before.
Ooh.
Which is also one of the reasons they were defeated, other than some other battles that had taken place right before that against the Vikings up north. All side story. But they were so impressed that they were like, not only are we going to make sure we become horse people, but we're going to make sure we can talk about horses and use horses in all our metaphors and talk about horsepower. We measure our cars by horsepower.
Mm-hmm.
Also, my blender is measured in horsepower. That's how strong it is.
All right, every pony, let's shake our tails on to the next slide.
All right. You're welcome. Which this always, like, as a student, cracked me up the first time I learned that bitte in German was both please and you're welcome.
Mm-hmm.
And, like, it threw me off a little bit because it's like, but wait, don't people get confused? Because as an English speaker, I'm like, you got to have a way to acknowledge the thank you. And, specific to the acknowledging the thank you. But you're welcome is such a weird thing. In terms of a phrase, like really, again, acknowledging the thanks, like you're welcome, you did something for me, you're welcome. Also, English, it's really interesting because this is an example where welcome is being used so differently. It no longer means welcome, like welcome to my home. You're welcome. Like when we say that to somebody, we're not saying, come on in.
Yeah.
We're saying, I acknowledge your thanks.
Saying, you're welcome to feel good about that.
It's just such a weird thing. And so this is a great example of where a language may not have a standard way of saying it. Some languages, instead of saying you're welcome, you say something along the lines of no problem.
Mm-hmm.
Not a big
Very
deal.
Common.
No worries, no thought, no nothing.
De nada is of nothing.
Yeah. So it's just essentially like for a lot of languages, it's just essentially like, yeah, don't even think about it. Other languages, it's very important to acknowledge.
Yeah. German, I don't know how it got here, but bitte comes from a verb that means to beg. And it's just I beg. Makes sense how that would mean please.
Mm-hmm.
But then how that got used for your welcome, it's like, danke, and it's like, I beg you, please stop.
No. Here's my wild goose theory off the cuff here. Please don't believe what I'm about to say, but it's from you begged well. You begged so well that I did something for you. But you're welcome.
But shouldn't that be bittest?
Well, it got shortened, babe. And so there we go.
How does that conjugate? Is it bittest or bits? Du bits.
I think it would be bits.
Du bits.
Yeah.
Bits. Yeah, you should start saying that, Germany. All right.
So that one, I'm not going to stay on this one too long because it is just such a sort of weird oddity, and you have to figure out how it feels right. If it feels right, you don't have to, just like the thank you definitely don't have to weigh. You don't have to weigh. You don't have to have a way to say you're welcome in your conlang.
Yeah, this is probably the one that I think conlangers come up with the least. I know it's one that I've done the least.
Yeah.
The one I can think of is High Valyrian, where Kihrim vase, as you say, like with gladness, I greet you. Biar vase means you're welcome, and it's like with luck.
Nice.
Anyway.
Nice.
Arabic, by the way, comes from pardoning forgiveness. So afwan comes from a verb that has to do with, like, your forgiveness, your amnesty, or so on. Anyway.
Again, though, a lot of these phrases are born out of religious rites or ceremonies. And so if you've thought about religion in your con world and what does that mean? Do they have some sort of unified religion? Do they have some sort of ceremony or ritual, expectation for certain things? You may end up using those for these common expressions that get used far outside of any sort of religious context or, ritual context, and end up getting used regularly to the point where even if the religion slides away and, in your con world today, it's no longer practiced, it's still just a part of the language. Okay, the next one is excuse me, which in English we just say sort of excuse me for multiple situations, but in other languages you actually have to like differentiate. Are you saying excuse me like let me through the crowd? Are you saying excuse me like I just did something, please excuse it? Or are you saying excuse me like hey, I'm trying to get your attention? Not like trying to get through, but just like, excuse me, I'm about to ask you a question. And in some languages, these are all treated differently. In English, we just say excuse me.
I think this one had to have come from French, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it doesn't look, and who knows? This is actually sometimes
well, I don't
where...
know. In French, they say pardon-moi, right?
Pardon-moi, excusez-moi.
Oh, excusez-moi. Yeah, okay.
But this is one of those interesting places where etymological dictionaries will sometimes tell you what expression replaced, or the expression that it replaced. And so I wanted to see if there was...
Because, as David is looking for that, really what he's saying is because this came from French, and it did, I mean, just look at it. It's like it's got the EX prefix. This is something we got from Latin through French. So anyway, there must have been some way of saying that in English before the French interaction.
Yeah.
And so, interaction, that was a nice way of saying it, before like the Norman Conquest and all the French came into the language. And so, yeah, that's an interesting question.
Yeah, this was absolutely borrowed from French, but okay. Ooh, displaced native Old English lad, an excuse, and ladian, to excuse. So maybe there was an expression that came from that.
Maybe.
I have no idea. Trying to see if they have any descendants. Load! Our word for load came from this.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Or no, wait. No, I think that may have been a different one.
Okay, so it may not
be. All right, never mind. Sorry. Anyway, yeah, let's keep going.
Excuse me may also be related to sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And so you may actually, instead of saying like, excuse me, you may just be like, sorry. And I think, I'm trying to think, in German, Entschuldigung,
yes,
I think really means both.
Oh.
Like, Entschuldigung.
We have something for this.
Yeah, we do have excuse me.
Oh, well, apparently we don't have it on the other side. Did we not write it in?
Did we not actually put it in the dictionary?
I'm sorry. You keep going. I'll take a look.
David, well, it's probably a conjugated form of something bigger, like ukrib.
Ukrabi.
So anyway, David's looking up in Chicopsa. We do have an excuse me in Chicopsa.
With my promise.
With my promise.
Or with my oath, something like that. Yeah.
Nice.
Anyway.
But yeah, so like excuse me and sorry may end up being the same in your language. They could be very different. You could have multiple excuse me's, again, depending on whether you're essentially apologizing for something or whether you're like trying to get through and you haven't done anything yet, but you're asking people to move, essentially.
And then German, it's entschuldigen. Entschuldigen is to excuse. So Entschuldigung is like excusing, right? Something like that. And then the etymology, schuldig is ultimately guilty.
I was going to say it's the same as guilt, isn't it?
It is. Huh. What do you think the ent prefix is?
Oh, that one gets used in a whole bunch. And
Anti.
it's like, yeah.
Oh, wait. Representative of a commanding form. And right. Middle Dutch. Und, English, und un.
And like it could be translated as with in some cases, I think.
All right.
And so it could have been like with guilt.
Yeah.
With guilt. Yeah. I did this.
Makes sense.
Okay, so all things to think about.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to kind of end with like some other thoughts, and we don't need to go into any deep discussion,
sure.
But other expressions that you may think about are, for example, answers to yes/no questions. And that includes like, how do you actually say yes? So, someone says, I don't know, do you have a pencil? And you can say that in your conlang, but do you have a way for someone to answer back yes? No. Maybe. I don't know. These are all ways you can answer yes/no questions. And what's funny is like we often will describe in detail ways to create yes/no questions, but like unless we know we need an answer to it.
Right.
Like I don't think we can say any of these in our LangTime languages. I don't think we could just like we can ask the questions. We can say, do you hop? I don't know that we can say yes. We could answer, I hop, which in some languages, that's just what you do is you kind of repeat it.
Yeah.
Or you use the verb from the question.
So for example, in Finnish, if I were to say to Jessie, tajuatko, että olen pupu?
Aww. And I would say, tajuan. I do.
So then what I said was, do you realize that I am a rabbit? And Jessie said, I realize. So, but it means yes.
Yeah. And in questions where like the main verb is essentially is, like you can just answer is.
Right.
As your answer. So like, it's like, I don't know. Onko. I'm going to do this. Just a second. I got to think though.
Okay.
Onko sinula nälkä.
Shoot.
Really?
Okay.
I meant to say
Olen. Yeah. No. On. I'm sorry. On. Gosh.
I was just trying to get you to say on.
You're right.
But I asked him if he was hungry, and he's not,
yeah.
And he wasn't gonna lie, and so instead he said no. But anyway, think about how in your language that's gonna work. Like again, we often think about how to express the question. We don't always think about how to answer it. And this is specific to yes/no questions because the WH word questions, the answer is whatever you're asking. It's the what, it's the who, it's the where. But for yes/no questions, these are a little bit more pragmatically difficult.
A rather famous one that was made the rounds in early conlang circles was this Japanese mu, which is the way to answer an unfair or poorly phrased yes/no question.
Nice.
So in other words, like, like, Jessie, is your hair still blue? And so it's like, if she would say, yes, my hair is still blue, it's a lie, it's not. If she would say, no, my hair isn't still blue, it would imply that it was at some point in time. An answer like mu would be like, you've asked a question which can't be answered with yes or no.
And that would be brilliant to have in, say, a courtroom
Yep.
where lawyers will specifically ask yes no questions like that, where the person answering may end up like they may say no because they're thinking my hair's not blue. But then, yeah, like you had said, oh, so it was blue at the time of, and anyway, it can lead to a lot of problems.
Yep.
Okay, so think about that. Other common question and answer pairs are things like how to ask, like, how are you? So how to ask how somebody's doing. But then again, on the answer side, think about how would you answer? What are the expectations if somebody says, how are you? Or how are you feeling? Or how goes your day? Or however you say it. How do you say answers like fine, good, okay, not great, bad? Like how do you actually answer that? Informally, things like, we just say, what's up? How do you say not much? Your language may not have any equivalent to that, mind you, but just again, think about like how those common question and answer pairs might work in your language. Or save it for later. This is like way down the line when you're trying to do conversations in your language. And then finally, other frequent phrases, along with things like welcome, things we say a lot, like let's go, on my way, bless you, gesundheit. Watch out, like some way to tell somebody, duck, watch out, be careful. Or, like if somebody's leaving, some way to say like, have fun.
Yep.
Like just frequent phrases that your speakers may say. Maybe they're things we don't say. One frequent question that we came up with on our common expression sheet for our Moray language, which is used in Vampire Academy, is the question, is your bloodline royal? And that is never a question I would ever ask anybody in my life. I don't think American English speakers would ever think of that question, ever. I don't even think British speakers who have royalty there would walk around asking people in their daily life, is your bloodline royal?
Yeah.
But that is something that was very important to that world and those vampires. And so it was a common expression. And so, yeah.
Yep.
So all that is to say, lots of things to think about. Lots of very pragmatically rich things. We hope that this has inspired you to think about your own language and maybe think about potentials for what you might create for those. Any final words for us, David?
There actually is one more thing that I wanted to talk about that we hadn't touched on yet.
Yeah.
It applies to everything. And so there's, kind of like a continuum, right, in languages between, highly inflectional and very lightly inflectional. For expressions like these, if you're doing a very lightly inflectional language or an isolating language, an analytic language, it's not so much of a concern. But when you have a language that's very highly inflecting, it is something to think about exactly where the expression originated from to figure out what form the words that survived are going to be in. So for example, like French is a poor example, but like, in s'il vous plaît, because vous happens to have the same form as subject and object. But if you want it to be a little, if you wanted to be more familiar, there is technically the s'il te plaît, where if it please you, right? And the reason that it's te or te, which is te, as opposed to tu, which is the the nominative subjective form, is because the literal expression goes back to being the case where it is a verb. The verb is in third person singular because the subject is il, and then what comes in between is the object, and so must be in the objective form. By the time that becomes an expression, none of those things are a concern anymore. Like, you don't even think about them. But they're relevant when you create the expression. So this is for example, if you have a bunch of cases, think about, even if it's shortened to a single word, think about what the expression used to be. Because, for example, often it will be the accusative. Because like what you're saying is not like necessarily good day, but I wish you a good day.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that survives is the good day part, but it's in the accusative because it used to be.
Which is why it's Guten Tag and not Gut Tag.
Exactly.
That EN is the accusative.
That's a perfect example, because what's the word for good in German? It's gut. But it's guten Tag, because that little in part is actual inflection for an adjective, and it's there because it used to be an object, even though it's not anymore, and nobody even recognizes it as such. So the places where you want to look out for this is if you have cases with agreement and things like that, figure out what case it was in. It's probably going to stay in, and then you just drop words off. Even if it gets smushed up, right? Like, imagine like if Guten Tag in German, like imagine a future German where, say, there was like T's became voiced after nasals and the nasals dropped off, right? Suddenly you end up with something like, Gute Tag with a D in it because the N used to be there, right? So it's still going to be relevant. And then for verbs, think about who is the subject. Is it like, I'm wishing you a good day? Or is it a passive? A good day is wished upon you? Or like, is it the subject, like a good day is to you, or something like that? For High Valyrian, for example, the way that you say yes is just is, so isa, because what you're saying is it is the case that blah, 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 blah. And you do that for anything that is not the future. Mm-hmm. When it's the future, there's a suppletive form, and you use that to say it will be the case that. Mm-hmm. And so that's the only thing that you need to know, because of these two different ones. So it's either isa if you're talking about something that has happened or is happening or whatever, and kessa if it's going to be something in the future. Anyway, so that was the only thing I wanted to mention.
One more thing to add on to that is that sometimes the shortenings will be neither nouns nor verbs, but maybe an adverb form or an adjective form. And so to think about, again, how the full expression works, because if you have, for instance, adverbs built off of adjective forms, but really what the expression calls for is an adverb, you're going to use that form instead of the adjective one, which may be more common. And so another thing to think about, which is why we say farewell and not fair good, even though these days you would say, hope you're doing good.
Yes.
And, it's that well adverb, there's a reason it's there.
Wow. Yep.
All right. So, and what will quickly become grammaticalized, I'm sure, across all English speakers is our beloved Stay Grammar. And please do stay grammar. And we look forward to seeing you all on Thursday in our live stream.
Right on. Bye, everybody.